to follow David through the wilderness as he is on the run to avoid being captured and killed by Saul. Uh, Last week we left off just right in the middle of chapter 26, and we'll get there in just a minute. We are uh, in a series of three stories that were placed right in the middle of David's flight from Saul. Each story presents David with the opportunity to kill the antagonist. Uh, in the first story, chapter 24, the antagonist is Saul, and David has a chance meeting with Saul in a cave. But when presented with the opportunity to kill Saul, David refuses, and he refuses because he says Saul is God's anointed, and he will not raise his hand against God's anointed. It was a good decision, David. Trust in God. That was good. So let God decide how this story will unfold. And that was David's decision then, and that was a good decision. In chapter 25, the antagonist was Naboth, a wealthy sheep herder. When Naboth turns down David's request for food and does it in a way that is very insulting, David feels that he must kill Naboth and every male in Naboth's household to regain his honor. David lives in an honor-shame society, and that's the way that things played out in honor-shame societies. But David listens to the counsel of a very wise woman, Abigail, and spares the lives of Nabal and his household. Another good decision, David. Trust in God. Let him decide how best to deal with Nabal. And now the third story in the series. That's chapter 26, where we are now. Again, Saul is the antagonist. He has once again tracked David down with the help of the Ziphites. When Saul and his army beds down for the night, David becomes the tracker. So he takes with him Abishai, his nephew, and together they are able to penetrate the security of the camp. Their escapade takes them past all the soldiers, all the sleeping soldiers, right to where Saul is sleeping. And that's where we left off last week. Verses 6 and 7. It says, David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite, Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, who will go down into the camp with me? Or who will go down with me to Saul? I will go with you, said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Now, what were the chances of David and Abishai getting past all those soldiers to the very center of the camp? Probably not very good, right? But in this case, as we're going to find out, God was directly involved in this escapade. God was very much in control here. God was watching out for David. God was making sure that none of those soldiers woke up to stop David in his mission. So verse 8 says, Abishai said to David, today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice. So just like the soldiers back in the cave, David's soldiers wanted David to take the opportunity to kill Saul. Again, Abishai says, David, Saul has been delivered into our hands today. So let's take care of the job right here and now. I will do it. Well, but as on the other two occasions, David was kept from doing it. God held him back. But David said, Abishai, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on God's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he said, the Lord himself will strike him. His time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head, and let's go. So then, how is it then that David refutes Abishai's advice? Anyone? Well, see, David made a good decision here, didn't he? I think we'd all agree with that. He made a decision to let God handle the Saul situation. I think we're going to see very shortly that David stops making good decisions. So he's made a good decision here, so let's enjoy the good decision he made before we move on. So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put him into a deep sleep. So David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army, to Abner, son of Ner, aren't you going to answer me, Abner? So this time, David is brave enough to enter right into the middle of Saul's camp. But then he leaves, and now he becomes very cautious. He leaves a wide space between him and the camp. He's probably on a nearby hill, perhaps a small valley in between them. So Abner replied, who are you who calls to the king? David said, you're a man, aren't you? And who is like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you have done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men deserve to die because you did not guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and the water jug that were near his head? So now, a couple of weeks ago, in our Wednesday night class, we talked a little bit about shaming, didn't we? And in the prior chapter, we saw an example of how Naboth shamed David by turning down his request for food in a very disrespectful manner. David lived in an honor-shame society, so David felt that he was justified in going after Naboth and killing him. So now we see David shaming Abner. And what would Abner be expected to do about this in an honor shame society?
Well, typically in more modern times, they would have a duel. You know, if you challenge somebody and you question their honor or diminish their honor, that would be sufficient to have like a duel to the death. That wasn't uncommon in ancient times or in modern times. I think we actually lost some of our forefathers with a duel, if I remember. I forgot, was it Alexander Hamilton or someone, or Aaron Burr, who had a duel?
Yeah, who did have the duel? I can't remember now. Yeah, that was typical of an honor shame society, though. When you shame someone, when you assaulted them, it typically led to violence in an attempt to regain one's honor, and that's why David was about ready to resort to violence against Naboth. But in this case, Abner doesn't do anything. And we kept thinking about what could he do? He was sort of behind there. So if he felt the urge to get even with David, this certainly wasn't the time to. Perhaps that'll come later. We will see. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. So then Saul's starting to wake up now. Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done? What wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering." So he says, if you're coming after me because the Lord has told you to, why then I will repent. I will offer an offering. But he says, however, if ever men have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They have now driven me from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, "Go serve other gods." So you have here kind of a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the next chapter. David says, "Your men have, they're driving me away. They are driving me to leave this country, to leave my inheritance, to go live among strangers." So you can sort of see here what's going through David's mind. He has definitely had thoughts about leaving the country again, and we'll see that happening in the next chapter when we get there. But Saul has been chasing David now for 4 years, and I'm sure David is getting worn down. I'm sure he's very weary of that. So while he's had his up moments, he certainly had his down moments too, perhaps more down than up. It's taking toll. Yeah, did I hear someone there? Or did someone have a comment? Okay. Well, we'll move on then here. So he says, now do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The king of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains. I think before, in his previous meeting with Saul, David had compared himself to a fly or a gnat or something like that. And now he compares himself to a flea and to a partridge in the mountains. Uh, uh, Back in those times, partridges were popular game birds, but if you're hunting partridges, you wouldn't go to a mountain to find one partridge. You hunt them out in the fields where they congregated in large coveys, where you could catch many at one time. So David is is pointing out to Saul that it's really a waste of time chasing after him. And also David's words here foreshadow of what is about to come. See, David is getting near the end of his rope here. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Come back, David, my son, because you consider my life precious today. I will not try to harm you again. Surely I have acted like a fool and have erred greatly. So once again, Saul says, all forgiven, David. Let's come back and we'll start all over again. Do you think Saul was sincere about his words at that point in time?
Perhaps for a brief instant, but probably not even that.
Yes. Yes, he probably was not. I don't know, Saul believed what he thought he said. I'm not sure where Saul believed his own words at that time, but we know how erratic Saul was. See, best of friends, see, one day, and then best of enemies the next day. Yeah, that's right, Tom. Thank you. But see, David said, here's the king's spear. David answered, let one of the young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble. Then Saul said to David, may be blessed, my son, David. You will do great things and surely triumph. So this is interesting here now. Saul predicts that David is going to win this fight, doesn't he? He predicts that David is going to be the winner here, so then it says David went to his home, and David went on his way. Now, we might ask at this time, since David went on his way, but went on his way to where? Saul went home, but David had no home to go to, did he? So it just said he went on his way. This was David's fifth escape from Saul. Saul and David would never see each other again. This was to be their last meeting. Of course, neither one of them had any way of knowing this at the time. But they had been, as we said before, David had been on the run for 4 years. 4 years is a long time to be on the run, isn't it? That's a long time to be separated from your family and from your support group, especially in honor shame society where family means everything. Everything you do, every decision you make is done in the context of family. But with David's desert experience, he was cut off from his roots. And he had been physically and spiritually devastated. Physical and spiritual, those two go hand in hand. It's kind of hard to separate one from the other because they work together. So is this kind of what happens when our faith gets tested? When our faith gets tested, it's usually physical and spiritual tests working together. The two go hand in hand. They're inseparable. So what about us? Do we ever go through desert experiences in our lives? And when we do, what causes them to happen? What is it that causes desert experiences in our lives?
Hey, Alan?
Yes, Carol.
Okay, I may be reaching a little bit far out here, but in a way, what we're going through right now,
Yeah.
we're not, I mean, we're together, but we're not together. And
Yes.
so the idea that we can talk to each other, we can see each other over, the technology, but we're not together like he would have been in Israel, and he now is leaving there and going into the enemy territory, which is in the next chapter. But I was just thinking about us, at Westside, in the sense that I don't know if you consider it the same thing, kind of being in desert territory, simply because we can't be together physically. So you were talking about spiritual and physical. So we really can't be together physical like we were. And so this is kind of an enduring thing for us because we don't know how long this is going to last. When will we ever be able to get back together totally? So I don't know if we can compare it, but it just popped into my mind when you were saying that.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good point, Carol. In fact, Nancy, Lawrence mentioned a little earlier that he and I had a conversation earlier today, and we kind of talked about the problems of not being able to be together you physically as a congregation, and the importance of being faithful to our online services and our online classes, because that's one way in which we can stay in touch with each other, we can stay accountable to each other, we can be encouraged by each other, and that's a good way to avoid the desert experiences like David had. And we'll get into that in much greater detail when we get into the next chapter. We're going to find out. David's life has turned into a disaster in the next chapter. But that's good, Carol. Any other comments about that?
Well, I think sometimes God leads us into the desert intentionally because he wants to prepare us for something
Okay.
in the
Very
future. And I mean, David was going to be, I think there's another level of things going on here with David because he's like a type. He's the king of Israel, and he's a type for when Christ is going to be the king of his kingdom. And
Yes.
Christ came as a suffering servant. He had to suffer before he became king, or I guess one day he'll take his kingdom ultimately to himself. So I guess there are a couple of different levels with David. He has to go through the suffering, but also for us, similarly, we go through suffering sometimes because God's preparing us for something in the future.
Very good. That's right. Very good point. Thank you, Laura. Anyone else?
I had a comment. It was interesting in verse 19 that when somebody's banished from Israel, they're told to go serve other gods. So they're thinking about God as a God of Israel, just like other countries have their gods. God is not global; he's a local God.
That's right. That's a good point there, Tom. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That's right. When when David is thinking about leaving Israel, to him it's almost the same as leaving God behind. He said, "You're going to force me to serve foreign gods," because that's the way that people tend to think back then. God is a very localized God. That's the way they thought about idols, and so they tend to transfer that same kind of thinking when they thought about Yahweh. They had a very hard time seeing beyond Yahweh as being simply a local God, because after all, he dwelled in the tabernacle.
Alan?
Okay, anyone else?
Alan?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, this is something different. If somebody else has something to say about what you just said, I wanted to ask you a question about something previous, so I'll wait in case somebody else wants to say something.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Is it okay if I ask the question?
Sure.
Okay. This goes back to verse 18.
Okay.
When David is talking to Saul and he says, "Why is my Lord pursuing his servant?" And then he goes on. And it struck me when I read that back in the 24th chapter, when we had it back there, he said to him, well, he didn't direct it to him. He said, "Why do you listen when men say David has been unharming you?" And I remember when we did this, you said by him doing it, saying it that way, it was showing a form of respect to Saul. But now he's directing this question straight at Saul. So can I say that maybe his attitude has changed,
Sure.
towards Saul? He doesn't quite have that same respect. I mean, I know he didn't kill him, but still he's directing it straight at him and asking him a very pointed question, whereas before he kind of did it the other way when he said, why do men? You remember that back there?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So is he? So is he showing less respect now than he? Okay. That's right. His attitude has changed, since his first encounter with Saul, and he is a little bit less respectful in this case than he was back in chapter 24. And that's a good observation, Carol. Uh, um, any opinions as to just why he's being a little less respectful here?
Okay, I'm not quite get what he's asking.
Tired.
What are you asking, Alan? Alan, what's your question?
Well, you said that that you noted see David had an attitude change towards Saul.
Right.
As compared to chapter 24, where his first encounter with Saul.
Right.
Why the change in David's attitude here?
Well, for one thing, you said it'd been 4 years that this has been going on, and this was the fifth time. The fifth time, right?
Yeah,
I think he's getting a little weary of it.
yeah, right. Yeah. He's getting a little tired of this, and he and Saul had been through this before, hadn't it? And so David's probably saying, "Yeah, well, this isn't getting me anywhere." So yeah, so his his discouragement, I guess, is showing in his attitude towards Saul. Speaking of attitudes, we'll talk some more about attitude in the next chapter in just a few minutes. Anything else before we move on from chapter 27?
Well, I find it very strange in verse, where is it, 20, what is it, 25, when Saul says to David, "May you be blessed." I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just find it very strange that he thinks he can say something like that. I guess he's still, I know what you're saying there, that he's basically predicting and saying, yes, you're going to do great things. You're going to triumph. He realizes he's going to be the winner. The fact that he says, "May you be blessed," it's like, to me, he's giving him a blessing, and I just don't see,
Yeah. Well, Saul was a very, like say, mercurial type person there. She's blessing David one minute and then trying to kill him the next.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that's not the first time he did that, I don't think.
No.
Okay.
Not at all. So
that's why I don't think there's repentance there at all on Saul's part. I don't believe it. I don't buy it, because he's just so wishy-washy. He goes back and forth, back and forth. And
right.
One minute he says you're okay, and the next minute I'm going to kill you. So I just don't see.
Right. Yeah.
I don't see that.
Yeah.
Yes. A footnote that points out that every time there's a confrontation between Saul and David, David's just done something kind for Saul. So if Saul kills David after David just did something kind, and all of his men see that, then Saul's going to lose control of all the people that are following now.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Chapter 28. No, 27. 27 is a very short chapter, but there's a lot of good stuff in it. And the stuff is very applicable to where we are right now. Chapter 26 ended with the saying that David went on his way. And of course, the obvious question is, went on his way where? Well, chapter 27 answers the question. It tells us where David went. What might be helpful here is if we just read through the entire chapter. It's only 12 verses, and it's a really good story. So so rather than to break it up, let's read through the entire story, and then we'll go back and then we'll break it up a little bit as we talk about the lessons to be learned from each of the verses there. Says, but David thought to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. The best thing I can do is to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will give up searching for me anywhere in Israel, and I will slip out of his hand. So David and the 600 men with him left and went over to Achish, son of Maoch, king of Gath. David and his men settled in Gath with Achish. Each man had his family with him, and David had his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, the widow of Nabal. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. Then David said to Achish, if I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be assigned to me in one of the country towns, that I may live there. Why should your servant live in the royal city with you? So on that day, Achish gave him Ziklag, and it has belonged to the kings of Judah ever since. David lived in Philistine territory a year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzatites, and the Amalekites. From ancient times, these peoples have lived in the land extending to Shur and Egypt. Whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes. Then he returned to Achish. When Achish asked, where did you go raiding today? David would say, against the Negev in Judah, or against the Negev in Jerahmeel, or against the Negev of the Kenites. He did not leave a man or woman alive to be brought to Gath, for he thought they might inform on us and say, this is what David did. So such was his practice as long as he lived in Philistine territory. Achish trusted David and said to himself, he has become so odious to his people, the Israelites, that he will be my servant forever. Back when this story was first read to the ancient Israelites around the campfire, they probably had a good laugh over how easily Achish was misled by David here. But anyway, back to the beginning of the chapter here, we see that David has gone over to the dark side. After the second betrayal by the Ziphites, they continue to tell Saul where David was. So So David felt that he was surrounded by spies and that he could not continue to dodge military confrontation with Saul. He began to feel that Saul would eventually trap and kill him. Now, and that's in verse 1 here. Now, what do you think about this? You know, on the one hand, we see God looking out for David over and over and over again. There are so many times when Saul could have captured David, but he didn't. And it was because of God's interventions. God kept Saul from capturing David. But yet, on the other hand, David feels that sooner or later, Saul is going to Saul is going to trap him and kill him. Was this a lack of faith on David's part, or how could David, after seeing all this, seeing how good a care God is taking of David, how could he then say, "Well, Lord's going to get me sooner or later"? What about that? Do we ever feel that way?
Say, Alan?
Yeah.
The very beginning of that verse where it says, "But David thought to himself." As soon as I read that, what I said was, he's leaving God out of this. He's thinking about it himself and coming up with his own idea of what he should do. I don't see anything here where he's being directed by God, where he's actually gone to God and said, "Well, what should I do now?" He's coming up with this plan himself. So
very good point.
So, if thinking that, then I would say, in a way, he's starting to lose, or maybe he's already lost trust in God, even though he's had all these times before where God prevented Saul from doing something to him. Now he seems like he's turned right around and thinking the other way.
Yes.
Alan?
Yes, Mark.
Could it have something to do with the fact that he's in the Philistine territory where an oppressive darkness sort of like pervades the land, and that darkness came over David and his men? Is that?
Okay, the darkness there, yeah. His mind was he was getting very. I guess he probably had these dark moods come over him. That's what you're saying there, Mark.
Well, I think just maybe where he lived, the darkness was sort of like over the entire Philistine land, and David was residing there, and he came under the influence of that darkness. It's just the thought. I don't know if that's the case, but if it maybe it's just coincidental, but it seemed like he was at his worst when he was in the Philistine territory. I don't know.
Yes, yeah. There certainly was a different dynamics there in the Philistine territory than there was in Israel.
I also think that after a point, sometimes it's very human just to be tired and feel like you just want to give up. And I think that's what's starting to happen.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Good, thank you. That's good.
Alan?
Yes, Carol.
He's not in the Philistine territory yet. He's thinking about going there. He's saying, that's the best place for us to go. That's why I'm saying that prior to him doing that, he's not directing himself towards God. He's making this decision up by himself. And then once he gets in there, things get worse.
Yes.
I mean, you can see down below where you read already, he lies, he kills, and I don't think any of that was directed by God. That's him doing that.
Yes. And that's and that's true. God was kind of being left out of the equation here, wasn't he?
Yes.
David was thinking of himself, and he wasn't really putting God into the picture here. And we do that sometimes, especially when we're in a bind about something. We think, well, what's the best way out of this situation? And we try to think what's best for ourselves, and we don't stop to think about, well, how does God factor into this? Can I trust God to lead me in the direction I need to go in? So there were several things to, David's choice to leave Israel and go into Philistine territory was there were a lot of things wrong with it. The only time that we have any indication of any direction from God as where he should go, back in chapter 22, God spoke through the prophet Gad and told David to stay in Judah there and then David was going here over to Gath. He was going exactly where his enemies at Saul's court were hoping he would go. They were hoping he would leave Israel, and that's what he did. By leaving Israel, he was leaving behind fellow Israelites that he could have been a help to or a counsel to. So he was leaving them behind. He was giving his enemies propaganda that they could use. Look what David did back such time. He deserted. He committed treason against Israel here by going over to the Philistines. As Carol indicated, he didn't seek God's guidance before he made his move, and so there were all kinds of things that were wrong with David's decision here. So how about us? What happens when we leave behind our support group? What happens if we decide to stop going to church, to go off on our own, to leave behind any group to whom we might be accountable to? What kind of impact does that have on our lives?
I think it's easier. It becomes easier to lose sight of God's promises and his truth, because we're in territory where lies abound.
Yes.
I also think we'll search out friendship.
Good, thanks, Laura.
And community. We just won't necessarily be isolated in a foreign land, and we'll come under the influence of the beliefs of the foreign land. And
yes.
I know I've been I've lived in areas. Some areas it seems like there's an oppressive spirit, a darkness. Other areas there's been a light or sort of a I guess people who have been missionaries have said the same thing, that they lived overseas, in Muslim countries or pagan countries.
Yeah.
They can sense the sort of like an oppressive darkness that pervades the land.
Yes. Yeah. And so so the less and less influence that you're getting from your support group, the more likely you are to drift away. And that's one of the challenges that this current pandemic situation presents to us. It makes it difficult for us to be together. We have to um, uh, we have to be resourceful in finding ways to stick together and to support each other, don't we? I was talking to my sister in Indiana, my sister Susan. I think my other sister, she's on the call with us tonight. I was talking to Susan, my sister Susan, a little bit earlier today, and their church back in Indiana has started meeting together physically, but very cautiously, because they, I guess they weren't as technologically proficient as we are at Westside, and so they found the over the the internet meetings to be quite a challenge for them. So they're very cautiously trying to get together, and so we spent some time talking about the pros and cons of in-person versus over the internet, Zoom meetings and over the phone and so forth. And I think we both agree that in-person meetings were probably better, but right now it's just not very safe. And so we're doing the best we can right now with the technology we had and trying to keep everyone together. Any other thoughts on this?
Say, Alan,
Yes.
The decision was in lots of ways flawed. However, on the bright side, David was correct that this fruitless being chased, the time that it took Saul to chase and the time it took David to hide, nobody is being very productive for the past 4 years. And he was right that if he went away, Saul would give up the search. And the writer is challenged, although the writer is telling us all these flaws in David, the writer is very pro-David, and to justify him fighting for the Philistines is no small task.
Yes. 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 That's right. We got to keep that in mind. Samuel was written for the purpose of building up David in the eyes of Israel, and for justifying his his claim to the throne. Right. Okay, thank you, Tom. We are, I just now looked at my clock here. We're out of time. So we will take this up next week with about verse 2 in chapter 27. And we'll continue with chapter 27 and possibly into chapter 28. So thank you for all your comments tonight. I always appreciate you pitching in and helping with the lesson. And let's see who's doing our prayer request tonight.
Alan, this is Andre. I'll take him.
Andre, okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Andre, and thank you all for your participation tonight.